Welcome everyone, I'm Jason Jensen and you're watching Jason Jensen Trains. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and be sure to click on the bell to be notified when I upload more videos. In today's episode, I'm going to be showing you how to make a rusted corrugated metal roof. And I highly recommend getting on the internet and doing a search for images of rusted metal. And really pay attention to where it forms and the colors in it, and really try to notice the difference between old rust and new rust. And then above all, be patient when doing this technique, and really with doing any modeling. Don't be in such a hurry to finish the project. Take your time and really do the best that you can do. Let's go over to the workbench and get started. We're going to cover this roof in corrugated metal, and the product we're using is from Casey's Workshop, and it's simply paper that looks like corrugated metal. So it's white on one side and then silver on the other side. I'm going to spray paint these pieces all a gray, and then show you how I paint them, and then we'll rust them and weather them and then glue them onto our rooftop. So I've spray painted the corrugated strips using krylon. It's a deep gray, matte finish. Any gray spray paint will work. Like a gray primer would be great. Then we are going to use a sponge to apply burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, and yellow ochre. And then also we'll be using some brushes that I picked up at Michael's craft store. So after my spray paint had dried, I cut the pieces into strips, and I just simply, I knew that I wanted to put 3 rows of corrugated metal on the roof, and then also leave a little bit for a cap to go across the top. So there's no exact measurement, whatever works for you, whatever type of project that you're working on. These are probably about 3/4 of an inch wide. Next, what we're going to do is cut these into random sizes. And the reason for cutting them first and not painting and weathering the strips and then cutting it is because we're going to want to also weather the edges. So I've got all of my pieces cut, and it's usually a good idea to keep an HO scale figure close by to give you a scale. So the pieces that I cut, Comes about to his shoulder. This gives you an idea of the scale that you're working in. When I first started modeling, I had a tendency to make things too big. I thought that I was making them small, but I had nothing next to it that was HO scale to compare it to. So whatever scale you're working in, if you're in N scale, keep a figure or a vehicle close by so that you can put your object next to it to see if the scale is correct. Next, we're going to start painting rust on all of the pieces using a sponge and the colors that we talked about. So give me a second and I'm going to wash this palette off and start with a clean one. I'll be right back. Okay, I am back, and as you can see, clean palette. And again, I'm just using a Folgers coffee lid because I'm addicted to coffee. Okay, so now we're going to put a little bit of each color onto our palette. So I just put a little bit on the palette of each color. We are going to start with raw sienna. So we'll dip the sponge in the paint a little bit and then dab it until we get a bunch of it off. Then towards the bottom edge of these, we're going to dab on the paint. Now we're going to want to go heavy on some and very little on others, and possibly none at all on some. Okay, next we're just going to use the other side of the sponge and we're going to dab it into the burnt sienna. Again, dab it in the paint and then dab a bunch of it off. And always try to stick to towards the bottom of the piece. If you want some that are completely rusted, you could go all the way up. So like this piece here, I'm just rusting the entire piece. Some pieces I'm barely doing any. Variation is going to be a key in this project. Okay, now we're going to use another corner of the sponge and go with burnt umber. So once again, we're dabbing it in the paint and then dabbing a bunch of the paint off so we don't have too much on there. With the burnt umber, you're really going to want to stick to the edges of each piece. So next, I'm going to tear off another piece of sponge just because I ran out of room on that one. And we're going to use our last color, yellow ochre. Now this, you may want to also dab it into the burnt sienna, so it's not quite as yellow. It gives it maybe a little bit more of a an orange look. You can even dab it in some of the other colors. So really, the all of the colors represent new rust all the way to really old rust. And again, I'm just kind of mixing it, dabbing it into the yellow ochre, and then over into here. I'm just very lightly sponging it on. Next, we are going to take a small brush, this part does take a while, but using the burnt umber, you're going to want to dip your brush into it. And simply paint the edges. You don't want the white paper showing. The very top edge you don't have to do because the next piece will overlap it and cover it. And then if you want to, take a lot of paint off of your brush, and we're holding it sideways. And you're just going to drag it down just to hit the raised area. So I'm going to try to show you up close a couple of the pieces. So all of the pieces are done now, and I have washed my brush, which is a very good habit to start. Just always have clear water on your workbench, rinse it good, wipe it off on a paper towel, and you can even put the cap back on it. Makes your paintbrushes last a lot longer. Okay, so after all of that work, I think we deserve a little coffee break. Next, what we're going to do is use pastel chalks. We're going to use a orange color. This is the brand that I get, and make sure that it says soft pastels. So here are the pastels that we're going to be using, and it's just kind of a orangish brown, like terracotta. So we're going to scrub our brush, and I'm using a short-haired brush. And then we're just going to drag it down. And this will give us a dried, rusty look. This project does get a little bit messy, but it's all worth it. So again, you're going to want to go heavy on some, very little on others, just depending on how old and aged you want it to look. Before I apply my corrugated panels to the rooftop, I'm going on the underside and making sure that I am painting the overhang section, and also run your brush along the edge of the cardboard, because you want this to look like wood. So I will show you. Now, if your structure was white, you would want to use white paint underneath there so that your exposed rooftop would be painted white, same as the structure, or whatever color you're doing. Now let's start gluing these panels onto the roof. I suggest laying it out first. And what I mean by that is, let's pick panels that are heavily rusted that would go towards the bottom, and we'll do less heavier rusted panels towards the top. And then you're also going to want to do a variation in sizes. So you're going to have a thick one. Let me do this up here so you can see it better. Okay, so you have a thick one and then a skinny one next to it. Then we'll do a little thicker one. We're trying to match the length. And you have to keep in mind too that they're going to overlap a little bit. Okay, so that there will be our first row. Then above that, we're going to do the same thing again and lay it out first. Okay, so that'll be our second row. And then we'll do our third row. So this time we'll start out with a thinner piece. We don't want any of our joints lining up with each other. Okay, now that we have our 3 rows, we will use full strength white Elmer's glue. We're just going to put enough on to do our first row. If a little bit of glue leaks out on the edge, just wipe it with your brush. Again, you're going to want them to slightly overlap. So they're not butting up to each other. You're slightly overlapping them. They don't all have to be even at the bottom. Some can hang down, some can be a little crooked. And there is our first row. Now we'll start the second row, doing the same thing. The bottom of it has to overlap your first row. If there's extra glue, just clean it up right away. The Elmer's glue dries clear, so you don't have to be too worried about it. Okay, that side is completed. I'll give you a close-up look. So we'll just put this on the structure and glue that in place, and then we'll put some thin pieces across the top to cap it. I'm now gluing the roof on, and as you can see, I put a bead of glue along it, and then I'm going to go with my finger and just lightly dab it. This kind of helps the glue to set up a little bit and start to get a little bit more sticky. And then you don't have quite as much oozing out of the sides that you have to clean up. So then we'll just place our roof on here. Now we'll put the little pieces on the top to cap it. So we're going to fold these thin pieces in half and press them pretty tight to get a nice fold. we'll have to paint the edges of these that dark brown so the white doesn't show. So here's the finished building. I added some trim on the end and put in all the rafter tails. I also did a little bit of dry brushing with the dark brown, the burnt umber, just on the edges and some of the raised areas. The paper product is so easy to work with, and if you do have any little chipped paint or you nicked it with the blade, you can easily paint it with a fine brush using the dark brown, and it covers right up. And because it's paper, it glues to the cardboard roof really easily and really well. Here is an example of some more corrugated metal roofing. This time I used it on the side of the structure. Again, you can go as heavy with the rust or as little with the rust as you want to. It's really up to you and how you want your model to look. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Using the corrugated paper from Casey's workshop is extremely easy to use. It takes paint very well. Because it's paper, you can use Elmer's glue to glue it to the surface. This comes in HO scale and N scale. It comes in an 8-pack and even a 50-pack. So be sure to check out caseysworkshop.com. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy modeling.